Hey, good evening, everyone, and happy Sunday night to you, and welcome to Unlock the Middle's Videocast number, I believe this is 43, Chris. We took a little hiatus in the middle when we get into that leadership stuff, but we're back tonight, and we are going to dig deep into a topic that we think is really important to all educators out there, no matter what level that they're at, and that's digging into the brain and understanding how the brain works and how we can become better educators by knowing this material. My name is Dean Packard, and I'm the proud principal of Charlton Middle School in Charlton, Massachusetts. And alongside me, I have my good friend and co-host of Unlock the Middle, Principal Chris Starcheski. Chris, you know what? This is why we do what we do. We call this PD on the fly. Sunday night, an opportunity to reach out across the nation to somebody who's got a research-based knowledge of a topic that makes us all better. Great to see you, my friend. Hey, also, as you know, we're streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Please tell us where you're from, where you're watching. We're going to jump in there. And when you have a comment about something we're talking about, we're going to pull that on the screen as well, because it's a great opportunity tonight. Chris, nice to see you. Hurricane Henry's not going to slow us down.
No, Henri is not going to slow us down, Dean. We are certainly primed and ready for our wonderful guest tonight, Andrea Samadi. I'll introduce her in a minute. As you know, we're sitting here at the beginning of our school year, coming off of a tremendous bit of adversity. All of our educators in our buildings and across the nation have really done an amazing job at meeting kids and families of where they're at. Tonight is sure to provide some ideas and opportunities for how to take our educational games to the next level, especially as we start talking about social emotional learning and all that goes with it. It's not something that we do. Social emotional learning is not a lesson. It's how we approach teaching and learning in the individuals in our classroom. And I am looking forward to learning from Andrea Samadi tonight, Dean.
Well, I'll tell you what, Andrea was great when we started off in our pregame. We walked through some things. She's got a lot of energy, and she's really excited about the topic she's going to talk about tonight. So, yeah, I want to get going right on this if we can, Chris. Again, before we do, how about this Henry thing? You worked through it? I had a limb down in my driveway today. My pool, I had a table by my pool that shattered. But other than that, you know what? That wasn't even a hurricane.
Nah, you know what? We fared that well. We're New Englanders, Dean. We take on any storm that comes our way. We were just fine here. You know, yesterday I discovered a rip in not a rip, but my pool liner had torn away from the front when I was away for a few days. And you know what? I fixed it with some hot water and some pennies, and we're back in business. Hey. And that's about all the challenge that this storm presented me, making sure that I wasn't going to have.
You're a solutionist, man. Hey, that's enough about us. They don't want to hear about us. They want to bring in our person tonight, and Andrea's not going to upset anybody. So why don't I bring her in? Why don't you do the bio, and let's get into some deep discussion about the middle level brain and what it's all about.
All right, everybody. Hey, Andrea Samadi. She's an author and a teacher from Toronto, Canada. She now lives in Arizona. Hey, she's spent the past 20 years working with social emotional learning, students, and education. Andrea knows firsthand about stress in the classroom, as her first job from the University of Toronto's Faculty of Education was behavioral studies class. She felt overwhelmed by the lack of resources to help her manage and teach her students, so she set out on a mission to find ways to support students and educators in the classroom. In 2014, she created a program, Level Up, that was chosen by Arizona's Department of Education for Character and Leadership Grant to be used for Arizona public schools. She quickly learned that educators were looking for programs that taught the basics of neuroscience. In 2015, Andrea consulted with Mark Robert Waldman, one of the leading neuroscience researchers in the country, to help her make the connection between how the brain impacts learning, achievement, well-being, and results. She wrote the book Level Up, a brain-based strategy to skyrocket student success and achievement, using the latest research to help students increase learning potential and access those aha moments that make learning memorable. Her podcast, Neuroscience Meets Social Emotional Learning, provides resources, tools, and strategies to bridge the gap between application and theory, which sometimes is very, very difficult to achieve. Andrea is currently working on her third book, putting all the research she's gathered over the past few years in one place, and presents on the impacts of stress learning in the brain, as well as topics including brain-aligned strategies to skyrocket literacy achievement and emotions, learning, and the brain. Andrea Samadi, how are you this evening, and welcome?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you, for having me all the way from New England side. And I know some of your people are all over the country here. Thanks so much.
Well, it's our pleasure to have you
So
with us
welcome.
tonight. And, while you're sitting there in sunny Arizona, we are navigating through Henry. And I'll tell you what, for all those that did run into Henry and didn't fare as well, obviously our thoughts and, hope it stays safe and do everything while the storm dissipates. But more importantly, hopefully it gets out of here quickly and we all move on and get ready for work. And a lot of our people that are watching tonight have already opened their schools, and we're not opening our schools until next week. We got a week from Monday. So tonight's topic is really, really important for all of us as we kick off a new year with our educators. And if we can provide some tools for them to understand the brain, it's a win-win across the board. So welcome to Unlock the Middle.
Thanks so much. If you want to share my screen for me, share my PowerPoint slide, Chris, I can get started right away for you. And it's kind of crazy because when I first started to create this PowerPoint for envisioning the presentations I'd be doing in the schools this year, I had this ambitious outlook. I called it, I forget what did I call it on the slide, Teaching SEL Post-Pandemic, because my kids went back to school in July in Arizona. The one that I have, I've changed it now. But when I first was envisioning what the school year would look like, I had this vision that, no masks, everything was going to be over. And then we're a month with my girls being back to school. They went back end of July in Arizona. We're kind of different from the East Coast, but they get out in May. So that's why they go back a little earlier. We're a month in, and we've got what we would be calling a COVID outbreak with my youngest daughter's class, which means, and not to scare anybody, but this is reality of what is going on over here. We've got at least 2 kids with a positive COVID test. So when we wake up in our household and someone's got a runny nose and don't feel right, normally it's hot lemon water and that's how we start our day with some rest. But now we're all headed off this morning to go get COVID tests, and knock on wood, they're all negative. But this is the reality of what we deal with in today's world. And I know that all of you have visions in mind of the school year. And I listened to the resiliency episode that you had. It was pretty powerful of, there was someone that had a code word or something, or a theme that they use for the year. So, that's just a powerful way to think about the year. What are some themes, if anyone could just type in, what other themes are you thinking about other than resiliency, going back? I had this vision of how it was going to be, but let me know, type in what you're thinking, how the school year is going to start out for you. What are you guys thinking over there, Dean and Chris?
Well, we're thinking to make sure that we make everybody feel comfortable about coming back in. Obviously, we want our students and staff to feel safe. We want to make sure we have all precautionary measures taken to ensure safety. We want to make sure that we meet with our nurses. We want to make sure we work with our Board of Health, local Board of Health agents. And we work as a leadership team to do everything that we're supposed to do to keep COVID out, okay, to keep us safe from anything. Our job is to have an instructional platform for everybody to access the curriculum. And we will do that, and we will follow through in everything that we need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of theme, right on the shirt here, we're talking about being better, continuing to move forward, being better humans. How can we be upstanders? How can we make effective, positive change in the world, by applying our learning? But it all starts with getting kids, faculty, and staff through the front door safely, smartly, and efficiently to make sure they can be focused on their job. And that job is, of course, teaching and learning. And, one of the biggest focuses we have is social emotional learning this year. It's a buzz all around the country. I think it's more embedded in our general practice with what we do, Andrea. But, certainly I'm looking forward to seeing how the tie-in between brain-based function and social emotional learning can be best put into practice tonight.
And our theme, as I had it, which I should have said before going too deeply into the weeds, was every student, every day. And that's the way we approach our business. We want to make sure that we're out in front and doing everything correct.
Got it. And it's so important. I heard it on your last one. Someone said it. They quoted somebody and they said, when the person at the top sneezes, the whole school gets a cough. So the leadership starts at the top and the mindset starts at the top. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to a framework that's not only important for student success, and well-being, but it's also important for educator success and well-being. And working closely with some of the top leaders in educational neuroscience over the years, I'm excited to share some of the discoveries that tie back into the research that's come about in the past 10 years in this field to help with student achievement and academic achievement. And I picked just 3 topics. So if you see this slide here, this has all the topics I work with. If you look at the podcast, we have the 6 social and emotional competencies that tie back to Castle's competencies. And the idea of the podcast was tie in the basics of neuroscience. And I'm just going to pick 3 topics that I'll talk about today. And the first one is the 3 parts of the brain, which I consider the old way of learning the brain. It's when I first was introduced to neuroscience, it was in my Level Up book. But now there's something that's called brain network theory that I also want to talk about. It's the way that we look at the brain now when we see it in fMRI scans. And then I want to talk about self-awareness a little bit. So if you want to go to the next slide, Chris. So this was when I first started my career in education. This was my first week in teaching in Toronto. We were on the picket line and we were picketing. It was a high stress time for educators. We were trying to get more money and more prep time back then. And as you mentioned in the bio, I was overwhelmed and frustrated by the lack of resources that I had when I finally got into the classroom and got my classroom assignment. It was a behavioral class, and they didn't teach us any strategies at University of Toronto's Teachers College on behavioral management. So I just thought, fast forward 25 years, I don't think any of us would imagine that here's where we would be. We'd be on Twitter, we'd be on Facebook, and doing these live trainings to support each other around the country, learning new ideas about, trauma-informed learning. Here I've put Dr. Bruce Perry's book with Oprah that's got powerful lessons for us to understand how the students' brains work in the classroom. And when I think back to my students and how when they were misbehaving, I would yell at them and say, hey, sit down. I still remember all their names because I yelled them out so often. Sit down, be quiet, get back to work. That was my behavior management. Now I understand that as my cortisol was rising, so was theirs. And it was creating this cycle of doom that's, nothing good was happening. There's no learning going on. And so now Dr. Bruce Perry's written this book with Oprah that I think every educator should read, that goes back to what happened to you instead of what's wrong with you. And thinking about when students are triggered in the class, it might have nothing to do with the teacher, but the fact that they've got Old Spice cologne on that reminds them of someone that's done something to them in their past that triggers them to misbehave. So there's all this behind the scenes stuff that happens at the brain level that I think is so important for us to understand. And so just for anyone out there, think back. How about you, Chris? How about you, Dean? Your first day of teaching, what was it like? Was it like mine? I was all full of excitement of the differences I was going to make, and look where we are now. Just you tell me, what was it like for you both?
Boy, for me, it was, the theory and the application are very, very different. You sit down and you think about what the classroom's going to feel like, and it's a very different experience, because the reality is that the teacher at the front of the room is not actually experiencing the entire lesson. The students on the other side of the presentation are. And if you don't understand that right off the rip, you're going to have a very steep learning curve, and that's something that, fortunately for me, I entered in a small school, a school for students with learning disabilities. And we had a very good opportunity to learn each individual at a very, very high level. So we were able to identify what I now understand are triggers and what are strengths, and be able to teach individually to those kids. So fortunately for me, I had that experience before getting into public school education, where going from a class of 6 to a class of 32 in a math classroom. I was fortunate enough to have had that experience, but not a lot of folks do. And understanding how the brain works, and like you mentioned, trauma-informed understandings is really, really key and important.
And mine was similar. I had 6 sections that I had to prep for. I came in and it was survival mode for me. I didn't stop and think about how the brain actually could receive what I was teaching. And it's too bad, because the content was driving what I was trying to do. And I think it came to Tolerance for me, I tried not to get angry. I didn't want that cortisol level to rise in myself and all of a sudden lose the entire class. But I remember as a first-year educator and a second-year educator not having a toolbox to be able to really control those type of classroom management issues. And I think if we really step back and have a deeper understanding of how the brain actually works, especially at the cognitive level of 10 to 14-year-olds, my gosh, I think our approach might be a lot different than what the textbook approach would be.
Well, definitely. If you could change slides, Chris, this is where it all kind of came in for me, because I always felt, you know, you don't like to fail at anything in life, right? And when I was teaching and it was stressful, I was counting down to the days to the end. And I've done a lot of work on teacher burnout just to understand, well, what happened to me? What else could we do out there to put resources out there for people that are in the beginning and they don't have any strategies in place? Exactly, Josh, the fight or flight. But I think these strategies, as I've been learning them over the past, since 2014, I wish I knew them back in the day. And some statistics I'm sure wouldn't shock you guys, but did you know that chronic stress and depression cause measurable brain shrinkage? So a big brain is a good brain. And that teaching and nursing are tied for daily stress. And that 46% of teachers report high daily stress, which compromises their health, sleep, quality of life, and teaching performance. So just for all those teachers out there that are going back to have some sort of stress management protocol in place, next slide, if you could, because these shocking statistics don't just impact educators with work burnout that I experienced. Anxiety, depression comes in, cardiovascular disease, neurological disorders, and it's pretty grim. And these translate over to our students. They cannot learn if the teacher is stressed. And this was not taught to us whatsoever. It's impacting our students' ability to learn. We've got to have some sort of way, next slide, to decrease the stress that we have, whether you're school superintendent, administrator, or teacher, or the parents dropping them off at school and picking them up. It's all a stressful job. And we've got to stay at the height of our well-being to implement some strategies. So what are some strategies that you guys know of? Is all I ever knew of was exercise. That's like, it seems to be the go-to strategy that gets rid of every single problem. Is the only one that I've ever used. But what about you guys? How do you deal with the fact that that it's a stressful job?
I think that one of the biggest things that Chris and I do, we do pretty well, we collaborate. We build strong horizontal teams of educators together so they can share best practices, share ideas, and really come together and share moments and situations. Again, no one's in this game by themselves. And from the leadership down, we have to ensure that we are there for each other first. And that's part of my opening slides to my staff. Listen, we're only as good as the person standing next to us in the trenches. And if we do the job and we support one another and we support every child that walks through our room to the highest level we can, we're going to have an amazing school.
Yeah, the only thing I could add to that is we've got that professional balance and professional support network that we build, but also that personal side, being family oriented, having an understanding that we need to close our professional world down, even if it's for an hour or two when we're driving our kids to dance or going out to ref a basketball game. While we're still on, we can actually turn things off and apply some mindfulness types of activities. Being able to model that for the faculty, staff, and students is exceptionally important, because what we don't want is that burnout, is that stress, is that 3 sick days in a month, for mental health purposes. If we need to take them by all means. I need our faculty and staff to be present up here and in here for the kids every single day. And if they don't close themselves down and feel that pressure, they're not going to be able to maintain that for the entire duration of a school year.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember there was so little time for the things that I knew that I would have liked to have done when I was teaching, and even sitting inside the classroom of my kids it's boom, boom, boom. I remember not even being able to go hit the restroom if you need to. Yeah. So some of these strategies that I'm going to talk about, I know people are going to say, well, how can we do them? So if you can get outside and go for a walk at lunch, see the air, see the sunshine, if that's a possibility. If not, get to a window and get the sunlight through a window, because, you know, even that will have some benefit. Another one is zoning out. Let yourself do nothing for a while. I don't know what the prep times are. And if there's time for 5 minutes of zoning out and letting your mind do nothing, that's when the creative incubation times happen that we'll talk about a little bit more. But if there is any time that a teacher can have a little bit of stress relief in their day, there's nothing wrong with it anymore, because the alternative, you know, look at all the statistics of what stress is doing to brain size. It's shrinking brain size. It's leading to fewer cells. It's making it, you know, impossible for students to learn. So, and then leading to these chronic diseases like depression and Alzheimer's disease. So there's just got to be something built into the day. And I'm glad that you guys are supporting your teachers, because, you know, if you're in an environment that doesn't support it, you know, and that's what I remember teaching. Like, it was who can stay there the longest. I didn't even know what time of day I was allowed to leave at the end. The kids left, and then everyone just kept working. I thought, I guess I'm supposed to do this too. There was definitely no support system. And then when I think about some of the jobs that I've had where I was the happiest, it was where we exercised together as a team. We would all jump into one person's car at lunch, and we would go to the gym together, and we were the most productive, because exercise definitely, in some of the podcast episodes I've done, it's proven it increases everything. Your results soar. And that was the job that I remember. Oh, that team was the best. We were able to do these things together. So I don't know, going for walks together, if that's even a possibility, but I wish I had that when I was a teacher.
We see that at lunchtime now. Our teachers do get outside more with COVID. We had COVID breaks with masks. They'd be walking around with kids. So everything you're saying not only pertains to educators, but also to children and their brains and their development, which is extremely important to get them moving. You know, we look at a traditional classroom, and you sit in a class for 60 minutes absorbing content. Anybody does that for 60 minutes today, you've lost the kids in the first 6 minutes. So again, that movement, that sunshine, that ability just to get up and just be yourself is key.
Definitely. Chris, if you could change the slide. Now, not one before that, the stress one. Yeah, and not all stress is bad, because we need that positive stress, that first level before we write a test or we have to do a presentation. It kind of motivates us. And then there's tolerable stress that's buffered by supportive relationships. But the one we're concerned about is that prolonged toxic stress, where we have no buffer to help support our students. And we don't know what happens to our kids before school or after school. But just thinking of ways that we can help tame our brains as well as our students' brains, some strategies that I've uncovered that are very powerful. This is a fun one. The kids like it. It's a crap board. So you write out all your conflicts, resistances, anxieties, and problems, and write it out. It's like name it to tame it. And I've got one. I've got it in my desk, and it doesn't change that much over the years. It's usually the same things I'm worried about over time, but you get it out of your head. It's like a file. It's like a computer file. You get it out of your head onto a piece of paper, and then you can look at it and say, well, you know, is this a real worry? Is this gonna happen? And it's just amazing what happens when you get it out of your head. What about you guys? How do you handle that toxic stress that you have running around in your head, or teachers' heads, or students' heads?
Chris, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. You know, I think for me, it's, I haven't been doing this job for an exceptionally long time, but I've been doing it long enough to understand that I can't let things outside of my control consume me. I have to be able to compartmentalize the individual responsibility and focus on what I can control, that locus of control idea, and really approach things as an opportunity as opposed to an obstacle. If there's a challenge that faces me, my faculty, my staff, I view it as an opportunity for addressing the question, why not? Why is it that we can't go in this direction? What's preventing us from achieving this goal? What is not allowing us to go down this avenue that we're a little nervous about? that's how I approach the toxicity. The other elements of stress. Yeah, you know what? The job is the job. There's stress. There's stress. We've got families, individual students, and futures at stake with our work, and we have to be able to focus and maintain that as a real tenable grasp idea. But for me, that toxicity is much more about control what I can control, go into crisis management mode if we have to, be realistic about what we can accomplish, and then ultimately celebrate any step forward that we can take. And I've got a great support system. I got an amazing wife. I got an amazing family, and I've got an amazing colleague and dean and other members of the leadership team that I know will help shoulder the load.
Chris, you said some great things there, and I'm just going to piggyback on that just a little bit. Josh Tovar on our leadership committee, our roundtable, he's right. Gym 4 to 5 times a week. I try to do that now to keep my body and my mind balanced. Trying not to be on 24/7. Our jobs, basically, I could be checking emails until I go to bed, and when I wake up, they're still there. So finding that time to shut down. I'm a true believer in systems and focusing on creating systems that produce efficiency, not wasted time, not areas of unknown where people are putting work in just to say, why did we do this? There's got to be meaning for it. Not working harder, but working smarter, just really looking at the things that are important to us. And more importantly, making sure that every person that walks in your building feels comfortable and supported for everything they do, and that they can take risks without worrying about looking over their shoulder, and hopefully moving the needle so that I'm talking about educators, become facilitators of the content that they are trying to teach, and not orators and just driving it forward. Because once you become a facilitator, there are multiple entry points for every student to connect with that curriculum. And that's a game changer.
Definitely. And I have this part of the brain up here that shows that there's actually a part of the brain that MIT neuroscientists discovered helps us to keep our cool. So whenever we're stressed and we take that pause or we step away, I always think, like, we never were taught to think about how's your brain functioning at this time. But just imagine there's a part of the brain here in the prefrontal cortex that's designed to help us to keep our control. So just keeping that in mind. If you want to go to the next slide, Chris. So as new research is revealed, we can learn more and more strategies to stay on top of our own personal well-being that translates to our student success. And where did all this come from? So I was a teacher in Toronto and got motivated to move to the US when Columbine happened. There's a lot of other things that happened over that 20-year period. You can see my about me on the website that kind of shows how I got to this place. But basically, I had a program that I envisioned in the schools, and I wrote it, and I got chosen by Arizona's Department of Ed to put the program into Arizona schools. And Jeff Kleck here was one of the administrators that was one of the schools that my program was going into. And he said, Andrea, I need you to write another book. It has to be brain-based. I can't use your program as it is. I need you to have neuroscience in the program. I need you to talk about Carol Dweck. And you don't have to do this, by the way, but this is what I'd like. And of course, I like challenge. I thought, I'm not going to have one school that is not using the program. Like, what's up with that? So I figured out a way to do what he had asked, and that was to create a program. So Level Up was really his idea. I consulted with Mark Robert Waldman. I was lucky. He was one of my friends at the time. And I said, can you teach me how the brain works? And Jeff Kleck threw all these books off of his bookshelf. It was David Souza's How the Brain Learns. And I opened up this book, and at first glance, so I had no training in neuroscience back then, and it was a little bit overwhelming. But I'm telling you, if I could get it, anyone can get it. Because I know when Waldman was first teaching me about the 3 parts of the brain that we'll cover today, I had no idea what he was talking about. I'd never once thought about the brain. I didn't even know what were the 3 parts. I didn't even think, were there 23? Who knows? But anyway, so he told me, go this route. This is the route that I went. And it's been 7 years since I've been working with educational neuroscience. And the grant funding that I was working with was there until 2020. And, that's just the way that it goes. You can go to the next slide. We continue to learn more and more strategies, because did you know that educators are the only profession in the world whose job is to change the human brain every day? So we should be learning about the brain if we're changing it every day. If you want to go to the next slide. And there's influencers that we can learn from along the way. So who was I? I was just someone that had a program that someone said you have to add neuroscience to. We figured it out. Well, we didn't do it on our own. We did it by studying and learning from some of the leaders out there, like Dr. Daniel Siegel. He wrote Brainstorm, The Power and the Purpose of the Teenage Brain, that I think every educator should read. If you've got a middle school student you work with, it shows what's happening at the brain level when kids are starting to push away when they're in middle school and high school and they want to hang out with their friends. That's a brain level thing. And, you know, if you're a parent, you're like, why don't they want to hang out with me anymore? That can be kind of upsetting. If you don't understand, that's biological. There's no control over what's going on at the brain level. So when you start reading it and gaining some understanding, it helps you as a parent and educator. And then there was Dr. John Medina, who wrote Brain Rules. And I was given this book when I worked at Pearson. My manager said, Andrea, I think you should read this book. And it was way before I was introduced to neuroscience. I looked at it and I thought, the brain, what do I want to know about this? And it just went on my bookshelf. I never opened it until that educator said, you've got to understand how the brain works. And I thought, thank goodness that person gave me Brain Rules. Then there's Horacio Sanchez. He wrote the book, The Poverty Problem. And he's a resiliency expert. He's doing powerful things with schools, making connections with how the brain impacts learning from the lens of poverty, and how economic hardship is changing our students' brain structure at a genetic level. So he's someone to look at. Then there's Dr. Lori Destitel. She runs the educational neuroscience program at Butler University. And so back in the day, there was no neuroscience training programs. And some of the people that I'm interviewing that are in this field, they had to find it through trial and error, maybe going to different countries. But Lori Destitel is educating our educators in this master's program that you can now do online. And her book, Connections Over Compliance, focuses on the need for co-regulatory and relational touchpoint practices, shifting from student-focused behavioral management like mine, where I would say sit down and be quiet, to preventative and relational discipline protocols. Like, she has creative ideas to help students in the classroom that I've used. She's got this amygdala first aid station idea that's pretty cool. And I used it for high school students. And normally when I would go in and work with the kids, someone's always misbehaving and talking. And then the teacher's mad because they're misbehaving when Miss Samadi's teaching. And so they get kicked out. I'm like, let's try something different. Let's send them to the amygdala first aid station where they can use this special lotion I bought in. Now, these high school kids are big, tough, burly guys. And they went over and they would calm down their brain, use the lotion, laugh, and they all thought it was a little crazy. But they went back to their seat. They didn't get kicked out. Learning continues. So these are just some influencers that we can all learn from. The most powerful for me personally, because she connects social emotional learning and neuroscience, is Dr. Mary Helen Immordino Yang in the bottom picture. She's a professor of education, psychology, and neuroscience at University of Southern California, the director of the Candle Lab. And her life's work provides the evidence for the powerful connection with neuroscience and SEL. And she believes we need to rethink how we value and educate our young people, the narrative around what they're capable of and what it means to be successful. Because we look at it, like, look at Mark Zuckerberg is a young guy, is the one that created Facebook. There's all these powerful young people around the world that we have to recognize. What do you guys think about that?
I think it's revolutionary. You're on to something that is coming out of post-COVID time period. We need to wrap our blanket around it and just jump on this.
Yeah, the concept of engagement, teaching for gravitating away from teaching for compliance, for teaching for learning and understanding that our capacity is only limited, by fences and walls that are put up in front of us. Right. We could probably talk a lot about standardized assessments and accountability measures and how that's defeating the idea of what we're talking about here. But we don't want to get into that conversation because it'll turn very political and it'll turn very,
nobody wins.
We'll go off on a big time tangent. But I think if we were able to get folks to understand that kids in their capacities are much more than what we have been taught and what we've experienced previously. And we can focus on the experience as opposed to just the learning activities, going through the motions. We will be in much better shape further and further down the road.
How do you shift that, Andrea? What would you say to the teachers who are currently doing what they believe is the correct way to educate kids? I mean, what type of techniques would you say to a teacher?
That's why I always focus on starting with the educator using it themselves. So that's why I talk about stress. Once you start to incorporate some of these ideas yourself, and that's the very beginning of the podcast, I talk about these social and emotional competencies, self-awareness. How do you do it in yourself first? Because you cannot expect it of your students. You know, how are you going to teach them how to be self-aware if you're not self-aware? They see through it right away. And it was such a blessing to get chosen to have my programs in Arizona schools, because I got to stand up in front of the students and see, you know, how did they receive it? And some of the students that were from the low income areas really just wanted to know, you know, how do we use this stuff to get ahead in life? You know, how, that razor's edge above somebody else. How do we do just a little bit better in our sports, just a little bit better in our academics? And we're not asking them to be rocket scientists, but just do a little bit more. And when we're doing a little bit more ourselves, that translates to our students and they get it. They say, okay, well, that's what she did, or that's what they're doing. And then they try it. So that's how I would suggest starting, just with yourself, one little small thing at a time. Take one thing away from this presentation.
Let me just throw this out there right now. I know we're in the middle of this, but let's take executive functioning at its core first, where kids are behind and not able to complete tasks in general that others can do. What would you say there in regards to understanding the brain, and what can teachers do to be able to help support somebody who suffers from executive functioning processing?
Well, look, just before we went on, so I've got my daughter, she's in middle school, 7th grade. She came to me and she's not struggling with executive function, but I'd say cognitive overload. She's got to read this book by the end of today. And she came to me in tears before I'm about to go live with you guys. And this is like a real situation. We've got kids, whether it's they can't complete their math, they can't do the homework needed. Now this girl trains, she does competitive gymnastics and she's training every night and doesn't have the same amount of time. So I have to use these strategies all the time with my family, let alone with when I'm interviewing people and digging out concepts. And what it is trying to teach them one small thing at a time. You can't do everything. If you're experiencing cognitive overload and you're in tears, we're in the emotional part of the brain that we'll get to, and there's nothing good that comes out of that. So we have to sit down and break it down. And sometimes it's going to mean that you're going to have to go to school and say, I didn't read it. I didn't do the work. That's just got to be where it is. I was at gymnastics and I didn't complete it. I'm going to have to find strategies that work for me on how I need to get this done. And I'm doing it with the youngest as well, with her math, and she can't get through all the problems. And I have to sit with her and work through it. And that's the only way that we can do it, is just to find strategies that don't stress them out, because we don't want to send them off to school and they're, crying inside or whatever. They're stressed out, anxiety, depression. We know what happens to those kids. We've got to identify, where are you falling short and what can we do about it? That's my strategy. What do you guys think?
You know, that's a super important piece about finding your balance and your responsibility and your accountability. You've got to be realistic. You know, for example, your daughter's a talented competitive gymnast, and that's a real passion. That's going to feed her soul and feed her mind ultimately. And if she has to take an element of her learning and set that aside to continue learning in some other medium, that's important to recognize and understand. Now, you're going to have educators out there who are going to say, you know, my content is exceptionally important. This is going to be the key to success down the road into life. But the reality is that we have kids who may work on a farm and they're responsible for maintaining, 160 head of cattle. We have kids whose moms and dads are working, 16, 18-hour shifts, and they're caring for siblings at home. We need to acknowledge that. We need to understand that. We need to focus on how to best capture their experience in the classrooms, not just focus on content, but focus on the whole development of our kids and acknowledge who they are and who they can potentially become. As a math teacher, that's hard for me to say. I was all about the content. I admit it. But I taught a lot of life lessons along the way in my class. And it wasn't solely about the content. It was about how you apply it, how you might be able to use it, or more importantly, how you might be able to listen to my advice as an adult that's totally unrelated to math to be successful down the road.
Oftentimes in public education, teachers are pushed to get through standards so they can be preparing kids for these tests. Now, what I'm going to say contradicts that whole process, okay? Learning is a journey, and you can't fit learning into a box. Once we begin to fit learning into a box, guess what happens? Kids don't access it, and we begin to see gaps, and kids don't grow, and then you get depression, anxiety, kids who don't want to go to school, kids who just can't assimilate to that classroom anymore. So it's time now, especially coming out of this post-COVID timeframe, where we look at children differently in how they learn. That's why I'm saying innovative, creative practices now. We can do this together if everybody bands together across the country and looks at the child as a whole child and not for something that's just driven by high stakes testing. That can't be the premise by which we live, in which we have to do our job.
Absolutely. If you want to go to the next slide, Chris, we can start just looking at some important brain facts. We see now how important it is to look at the brain and the impact of understanding the brain in education as well as in all areas of our lives. So it makes sense to me that we all have a little bit of background on this. And again, we don't get taught this in teacher training classes. So we've got to find other ways to gain access to this. And these are some brain facts that I thought were important that we should all know. Your brain is involved in everything that you do. It's complex. It's not fully developed until age 25 for females and 28 for males. So our kids need our support as parents and teachers all the way through until they can make their own decisions. Your brain is fragile, soft like butter and tofu. So we've got to protect it. When your brain works right, you work right. So that's kind of the whole emphasis behind all of this. We've got to find ways to make our brain right by keeping ourselves healthy and safe. And you can change your brain. So let's just say you don't like your results. You're not stuck with anything, but it takes effort and it's neuroplasticity. And you can change the direction of your life. You can change everything. What about you? How often do you think about your students' brains? I know it's right in the news with Brett Favre, don't play tackle football until after age 14. What do you guys think about all this?
Well, the brain's a delicate machine. And I just think that no matter what you're doing with a child when they're growing, every part is spinning within their mind and their body and their soul. Nothing is set in stone. So you've got to be ultra sensitive to have strong relationships. They need to know that you care about them. And Josh Tovar will say this here. I mean, one of our guys, the relationships are key and you've got to have them prior to any learning taking place.
Without a doubt, and Dean, you have 3 children. I have 3 children. And then we've got our school kids. Yep. My 3 kids are all very talented academically. They're go-getters. They have 2 parents who are educators. So, they don't really have a choice, but they have a drive, to move forward and to learn. They love reading. They love doing their math, but more importantly, they love doing other things. My girls, very talented dancers. My son loves athletics, loves sports, well-rounded, strong capacity. And for me, that tells me that the brain has multiple avenues for which to express your talents. And seeing that in our kids, we may have students who aren't able to achieve at high academic levels. That's okay. A grade should not be what is driving their experience in school. We need to become more focused at honoring individuals for who they are and what they bring as a strength. And just the last thing I'm going to say is that the school that I worked at previously, Eagle Hill School for Learning Disabled Kids, the DIS was in parentheses and it was all lowercase. Abilities was the focus of that word. And the reason that it was the focus of that word is because everybody approaches things uniquely and they have an ability, regardless of how they learn or think differently from others. We need to acknowledge that. We need to become better at that as we continue to learn more and more about how kids become more effective people.
So if you go to the next slide, I can get right into the 3 parts of the brain. And I know we're kind of coming close to the top of the hour. So What I'll try and do is see if we can get through the three parts of the brain, and which I would consider would be the old way of looking at the brain. Now that I've been studying with Mark Waldman, neuroscience changes so much all the time. There's some new discovery. And if I look at this picture of how the brain looks here versus how the brain looks on this side, you now have networks, nodes, the brain lights up in different pathways. But I think it's important to understand both. And if I look at what Lori Destitel is teaching her students, she's still teaching the three parts of the brain. And so I'll go into both if you want to switch the slide over. The first part of the brain is the reptilian or the hindbrain. So if you think about the brain like your fist, think about the back of the brain. It develops first, and it goes from the back to the front. It's the oldest part of the brain. It's where our bodily functions come from, like our heartbeat and respiration. It's where our fight, flight, and freeze comes from. So if we're a teacher in the classroom, we got to understand that our students can't help when their buttons are pushed and they want to fight for some reason. This is all happening at the reptilian old brain level. So we've got to have some strategies in place to help our students feel safe in the class versus fear, because we know that they're going to lash out, and that's when the behavioral problems happen. And I can tell you right now, I did not know this when I was a teacher. Some strategies that I have come across over the years would be blasting through fears to try something new, taking risks and failing forward. And also as you're able to share as an educator, some of the risks that you've taken to let the students know it's okay to fail. And what's amazing is they love hearing all the stories of where things didn't work out. They don't want to know when everything worked out and it's like hunky-dory. They want to know, when did it fail and what did you do about it? Getting the kids to journal so that they can blast through things that are bothering them. And again, name it to tame it. What about some strategies that you guys use to keep your students feeling safe in the classroom versus fear?
Well, at the middle level, Chris and I often talk about that the failure is not an option. So again, when we say that to kids, it takes a little bit of the burden off of trying to be so hard on themselves to meet every demand that's out there. That takes a lot of effort and approach from the teachers as well, because there's a criteria for learning. And if somebody just doesn't want to do their job and they fail, that's one thing. But if they focus on the process and relearn and re-engage and reteach, we often say, who wins? The child wins at the end. Okay, it doesn't mean it's a race for standards. It means it's a race for the journey of learning, and every child does it differently. But we also have student support teams in our buildings that students can go to at any time. Principal, vice principal, secretaries, cafeteria workers, custodians, they're all part of the learning community. And when you support one another, you can turn in any direction and talk to somebody, and the greatest schools have those type of processes in place.
Yeah, it starts with that relationship as primary, understanding that when kids walk in the front door, that they see your face, they have an understanding that you're there. Josh Tovar, comment, kids need to know you put your pants on one leg at a time like they do. We're people as well. And while we always say, we got to check things at the front door so we're present for kids, we can't do that in reality. The reality is we got to be able to be real and be focused on what is most important. One of my mentors from years ago in a grad program, mentioned the statement, if you're sitting there with a child who's got snot on their face, after they sneeze, you've got to be the one to tell them and have that little bit of courageous conversation that they have snot on their face. Because if you do not, and somebody else calls it out in the hallway after class, guess what? They're going to think of you for not having been honest with them. You've got to have the ability to have that honest conversation up front, build the trust, and let them know that you are there for them. You've got their back, and nobody is going to, come in between you. So that's really key and foundational for me.
Yeah, that trust is huge. Trust and respect. Trust and respect.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next slide, we go into the limbic area or the midbrain. So if we're looking at the brain as your fist, it's the middle part. It's above the brain stem, below the cerebellum. It's a collection of structures about the size of a lemon. And this is the part of the brain that responds well with motivation and rewards. And most of us work really well if we've got a reward that we can see. And so the idea is that we want our students to find contentment versus stress. And we talked about this already as a strategy. Exercise seems to solve all problems. Dr. John Rady wrote his book Spark about this. Another one is to eliminate automatic negative thoughts that students might have, like whatever's going on with my daughter right now, that, you know, she can't finish the work. I know it's going to be going through her head until we come up with some sort of strategy that she enters the classroom and feels that she's prepared. And you know, just whatever we can do for our students, amygdala first aid stations so that they're not stressed out. So this part of the brain is the most important part, I think, to look after. If you go to the next slide, when I first did this presentation, now we're going back 2014 in Toronto. I was called in to do this with York Region School District. And there was a room full of 300 educators. There were some students, there were some people from the Ministry of Education that came in to hear it. And when I got to this slide, I always talk about the fact that in my household back in Toronto, every single family member I had was hit with some sort of depression, anxiety, or something. And I was the only one that it didn't hit. And they weren't surprised when I said, well, I'm going to move to Arizona where there's mountains for year-round exercise and sunshine. So, you know, two of the ways to combat anxiety and depression, but it's important to know your family history and roots. And I just knew Toronto wasn't the right place for me. But when I get to this part of the presentation, I talked about the statistics in my area. When Chandler, Arizona, they're pretty grim for suicides for students. And when I mentioned what they were, I forget what the number was now, but it was a high number. And the whole room of 300 educators gasped. Now, this is the room here. If you can see, it was full. There was like people standing up all along the sides, and it went silent. And this kid raised his hand and he said, you know, how is it that the numbers are so high in your area? And he said, you know, we know how to stop, drop, and roll, but why do we not know what to do for a student when they don't feel right emotionally? And so he was so inspired. He created these posters for me, and I actually took them to Arizona schools. And who knows if they did anything, but you know, it's just an important part of looking at the emotional brain and understanding what's going on with our students at the emotional level. What do you have for your schools and students for recognizing our students' emotions?
Chris?
You know, we've got several screening tools in place. Number one, the formal side with the student support team. We do utilize the signs of suicide. We utilize the SSIS, SEL protocol for grades 5 and 6. But beyond those formal, metrics, and it really does found on the relationships and the visibility of our student support team and the importance of that connectivity to our school. You know, we encourage kids to be involved beyond the classroom. We encourage kids to look out for their peers. You know, we want them to be upstanders, seek help for others if you notice that they're struggling. And then ultimately seek help for yourself and develop self-advocacy skills. Teach kids, guide them, prompt them so they understand. Have real conversations with caregivers. Have real conversations with students. Acknowledge individuality and individual ways of expression. Acknowledge questions around things that kids are curious about, and have those real types of conversations and not be afraid of them. And that all lends us to the opportunity to address those pieces where if kids are feeling isolated or not a part of the community, we're able to show them that they are in fact valued and they are in fact not alone.
And I want to take it one step further. We use a form survey sometimes for kids, and we send it out so it's anonymous. If they're not feeling comfortable about something, they can directly send a message to the principal, the assistant principal, adjustment counselors. They don't have to be anywhere. We respond immediately. It's a great way just to set up a form and email it out to kids and send it out in a weekly message each week. You see something, you say something. If you have a friend that something's wrong, fill out that form, get it to us so we can have that learning community be airtight, so we make sure that we stay out in front. And there's no greater substance than picking up a phone and having conversations with people in their houses. I got 3 or 4 individuals that I will call next week, a week before school starts. I might even show up at their house to have a conversation and say, are you ready? What can I do to ensure that your transition back to school is just spot on? And we're here for you. That goes a long way, and it creates great positive ripples.
These are all so good, because some of the schools I went to locally, I just was handed a little card with some strategies that they use. And I know that the cards sat on the desk of the counselor. And so I like seeing that there's a lot going on here for students. So next slide is the neocortex, or the forebrain. And then if we think about our hand, it's the part that folds over, resembles a walnut. It's the part of the brain that's last to develop. And this is what we're talking about with our executive functions. So when you've got students and you're wondering what's going on with their executive functions, well, this is the last part of the brain to develop. And when I was doing a goal setting activity with some of the high school students with my program, I always wondered, well, what's wrong with these guys? Why aren't they filling out the sheet? And then I just thought, well, because they haven't been trained to think like this. It's our thinking, reflecting, perceiving, reasoning, planning, our self-awareness, and it's also our connections to the outside world. So some of the strategies that I think are important for helping our students to find connection and love versus fear in our schools would be having them to set goals and think about where are they now. And I saw a lot of the teachers had these plans with climate surveys that they're doing. I saw on your resiliency one, and just making sure that our students know, well, where are you now? Ask them, because it's really funny and crazy to ask them, where are you now? And they're like, what do you mean, where am I now? I'm sitting in class. Well, where are you in your academic plan? Where are you going? Can you vision the next? It's not easy for them. It's really interesting to watch them do that and see if they have self-awareness. Some of them have these intricate plans and others just have no clue. So what about you guys with this activity, this part of the brain?
I love the goal setting part that you just said. I've dabbled with that in years in the past. Right now, I think coming back into school, it's more about just social emotional wellness, ensuring that we can get that taken care of prior to our opening doors a week from Monday for kids, a week from Tuesday from kids. So that's the most important thing for us. But those goal setting sheets are imperative. We would do them prior to any academic progress that we were doing, and make them have the students be part of their planning process. There's no better buy-in when you create it for yourself. So simple sheets can be done very simply, and I love the thought of that.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, I had the opportunity to teach an exploratory class from my chair. It was basically like a keys to success class where we were talking with kids about goal setting, talking about kids about how they can approach and address adversity. Just read a book this year that goes with the theme of being a better human, which is what we're focusing on this year at my school. Being a solutionary. How can we take kids to be solutionaries, find something they're passionate about and apply their skills beyond the classroom? By Zoe Weil is the author. If anybody's looking for a great read, we can teach the world. We make the world how we teach it, is basically the premise. But the idea that we can focus on individual strengths and capacities and teach kids that this is more than just about an academic experience. This is about life and how to apply their learning. That's very challenging to do with the middle school because there's a whole big future. And guess what? There's a lot of distractions that are out there. Could be family, could be sports, could be TikTok, could be Graham, variety of those distractors. We mentioned boys and girls and adolescent development, and we're off on a big time tangent here.
But we also talk a lot about defining your why as a student. If you can define your why do you come to school every day? Is it because my parents tell me to, or is it because you really need an education? If they can dig into that and find their rationale for it, it's a momentum boost for kids to do well. And we continuously talk about it. We don't let that drop.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was Josh, he talked about it from El Paso on your resiliency one. Digging in to find out the kids' stories. They were born for a reason. What's their purpose? And once you figure that out, that sets you up for life. Right?
That's marketing 101. What do you think the big companies do? They market to their consumers. Who are our consumers? Students and parents. Why not? Why not dig in and find out?
Yeah. Well, if you want to go to the next slide, I think we're kind of coming to the end of the hour. So I'm not going to go into brain network theory in depth, but what I can do is just say, now we've got the idea of the 3 parts of the brain. Let's shift it. So understanding brain network theory, if we want to understand or add research behind anything we're doing. So let's just say we're a teacher and we want to know, well, how does meditation impact learning? You go to a website called pubmed.gov and you type in, how does meditation impact learning? And you're not going to get a study back that will say, well, it impacts this part of the brain, like the hippocampus or the thalamus. That's the old way. Now you're going to have these diagrams that look like this with the brain lighting up in different pathways. It's brain networks that we're now concerned with. What happens when you're learning, what networks are lighting up? And there's hundreds of them. But in this presentation, I only picked out 3 that I think are really important for educators to know about. And why I think they're important is because if we can learn to shift between these brain networks as a teacher and helping our students, that's when we reduce anxiety and creativity comes in. And so next slide, if you want to go through just the 3 networks, or the default mode network, where we have our imagination, we can have our positive thinking and our negative thinking here. But we also, if we have strategies to overcome maybe our automatic negative thinking, that's when we can go into our creative side of our brain. And, you know, back in the day, we'd get in trouble for glaring out the window and having our imagination taking off. But this is where all the creative side is coming in. So daydreaming is not a bad thing. If we can learn to switch between our default imagination mode, using our salience network, which is a regulating mode, and then our central executive is our thinking. And so when we're in the thinking mode, that's where our students are. It takes up so much energy and glucose, and that's when our students get tired. So we've got to have brain breaks. And I don't know if you guys do brain breaks or how do you incorporate it, but tell me what goes on. Do you allow your students this creative time in class?
We do. And we have educators who are very good at utilizing a quick 5 minutes here, change the pace of what's going on, have the kids up, have them moving, incorporate that movement into the learning, having centers in their classroom, keeping the learning fresh, keeping them, you know, on their toes. That is the key to success for kids to really gaining momentum with their overall learning.
Without a doubt. You know, one of the best things I do when I think it's the best thing that I do when I substitute teach in the building when I need to. I have all the kids stand up and assume the Superman or the Supergirl pose and just stand there for 30 seconds in complete silence and pay attention to their body, pay attention to their breathing, pay attention to their strength, have their focus be on what they can become and what they want to become, and then have them sit back down and get back on task, or have them go to their station and get on task. It helps stimulate that connectivity with mind and body in there. And we also have educators who utilize some mindfulness and yoga practices as well. Yes. In their classrooms. Very, very powerful experiences overall. But hey, Andrea, we are up against not really a time deadline, but we are up against a little bit here. I do want to say, number one, we just wow. You know your stuff, and
this could be a 3-part series, Chris. There's so much here that this could be boom, boom, boom.
Well, what I would like to do, Andrea, is table the rest of our conversation for a second session to be down the road. But I would love to bring members of our student support teams in so we can have a conversation about how this, and as well as educators, the mind-body connection with how we approach brain-based education, and be able to make some shifts and adjustments and acknowledge great practices that are in play, and also alternatives for making great shifts down the road. If that's something, I'm putting you on the spot with the question, if you'd be game for.
Oh, I love it. This is what I live and breathe. If you want to go to the last slide, people can just see who I am, where they can access me, just that very last slide there. Achieveit360.com. They can see the podcast, and please do have me back. This is in my spare time. I'm thinking up new connections to neuroscience and SEL with a vision to see what change can happen.
Well, it's funny. We have presentations that we have to do to our school committee on Wednesday night about SEL and what it looks like in our schools. And we're going to do those. And we just talk about those relationships and how they start from the time they get up and get off the bus in the morning to see us, to cultivate through the school, make them feel comfortable. And it's just about making sure that students can just know they're respected and know they're part of a learning community and know they can turn to somebody at any time. So important.
Love it.
You know what? That's it. Well, hey, everybody out there on Unlock the Middle Land. This is Chris and Dean with an amazing guest, Andrea Samadi, saying good night on a Sunday evening. We hope you enjoyed our presentation this evening. Please check Andrea out at achieveit360.com. If you have any questions about neuroscience and how it meets SEL, check her out in the Neuroscience Meets SEL podcast. And as always, follow us, check out our past episodes, and of course, reach out if you would like to be a guest on any of our shows to showcase your talents and abilities and influence a positive change in education.
Don't forget about Tuesday night, AP Roundtable Tuesday night with AJ Bianco and Cast.
Absolutely.
I know he's out there. So we got a lot of great things happening on Unlock the Middle. So we're rocking and rolling. Andrea, we're going to have you back again. We'd ask you to stay on a little bit right now. We're going to talk to you again in a minute. But Chris, we're ready to sign them off.
All right. Be well, everybody. Have a great finish to your Sunday night. Those of you who are still dealing with ennui, please stay safe, be strong, never be hesitant to reach out if you need anything at all. Be well, everybody.